What's going on, guys? Welcome to the Sober Fix podcast channel, where we talk about recovery, sobriety. We bring great guests on, share their experience, strength, and hope. And I just want to say big thank you to you guys. I think it's this sign right here, the subscribe sign. But more people have been subscribing lately and checking it out. And I have heard so many cool, transparent, brutally honest comments about people that have just said, look, I've been through the same thing. This is what I went through. This is what I did to get out of it. Or, hey, I'm looking for help, and I think that's what recovery is all about. Sharing our experience and just building a network of people so we can turn things around. I'm going to turn on the episode. We got Robert on. He's got almost 40 years of continuous sobriety. We've got Whitney on. She's got over a year. She works in treatment. I'm over 5 years. And we're just doing this thing a day at a time, man. Just trying to live our best life and push addiction away. Let's get into it. Thank you, guys. All right, everyone, we are back for another one, and we have convinced Robert, recovery guy, and Whitney to come back on and talk to us about some good recovery stuff. Going from being hopeless, having nowhere to go, your phone's not ringing, you got no support, you got no help. What do we do? And eventually we transition into recovery and things start to change and we start to see miracles happening. And like Robert just mentioned before we started, someone he knew at 2 days sober, and then he saw him at 20 days sober. Now he's got 60 something days sober. And we just get to see the transition and the miracle that happens in recovery. So thank you, both of you, for coming on. Thank you to anyone tuning in. We love it. We love the recovery community. We love people turning their life around. We love the support, collaboration, everything. How are you guys doing? I'll start with you, Whitney. We'll have you check in. We'll move over to Robert. How are you, Whitney?
I'm having a great summer. It's real busy, but great. I love working in recovery. I'm still doing that, if anybody remembers from last time. But it's so rewarding to work in recovery, and it's only half the week, but I'm seeing the magic and the miracles every day, and it's the best. Super busy with my other job, so that's kept me super busy this summer. I got a little sickness this last couple months, so I've been in and out of the hospital doing stuff with that, but I got treated finally, and so hopefully things are on the way up. But yeah, super excited to be here, be back, and work with you guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're happy to have you, Whitney. We always are. We love your input. I'm sorry you got sick. I'm glad you're starting to feel a little bit better. What have you been up to, Robert?
I'm really super excited for a couple of reasons. I've taken on a new sponsee, and I normally don't take on new people not because they're new, but I don't have the time, the bandwidth to tend to them the way that I think a newcomer needs to be tended to. But I took a flyer on this guy, and I'm really glad that I did. We're beginning to do his 4-step, helping him with this 4-step, understanding it's not as complicated as we make it. And so I'm excited about that. His name is Rick. And then I'm excited. Laura finally accepted a position. For those of you who don't know, Laura's my wife. And she accepted a position as a finance director for a car group. And so the exciting thing about that is now that she'll have a fixed schedule, I'll know where I can serve, what my availability is going to be. So now I can get back involved with the treatment center and do what we do, the Ask It Basket, and take that into a treatment center here in the Daytona Beach Park, Palm Coast area, St. Augustine, somewhere around in that vicinity. And I'm excited about where God would have me serve and carry the message of recovery.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's so cool to have both of you on here. It always is. And just a reminder for anyone listening, maybe it's the first time listening, the Ask It Basket is questions from those that are early on in sobriety. Maybe they're in treatment, maybe they're in rehab, maybe they're somewhere that I've come across, maybe at Whitney's work where new people are asking her questions. Yeah. So we basically bring up those questions, and I know sometimes we've even pulled some from questions on YouTube that we talked about and different social media and stuff. But and we answer those questions, and it helps because a lot of times you're new, you're starting out, and you're just kind of building that support. And there's always questions. There's stuff that you just want to know. And a lot of times the only people that can sometimes answer them, if they can, are people that have already been through the journey and had those questions themselves and were able to find out the answers from other people that have been sober a little bit longer or had a little bit more experience. I wanted to ask you a question real quick, Whitney. I know you mentioned 2 jobs. How is that going with kind of balancing everything? I know you're over a year sober now. You're productive. You have multiple jobs. You work in treatment. How has it been kind of balancing all the different things that you have going on nowadays?
I actually love that you asked this question because it was something that about a month ago I was really overwhelmed with. I was working as much as I am, which is about 6 days a week, and then on my day off, I had other commitments for recovery. Um, and I think I got a little overwhelmed there for a minute, and I started to lose that. Um, it was a bit of a burnout, right? But what I really honed in on was I kept working just as much. I really honed in on my sponsees and keeping those relationships going and meeting with them as often as I was. I try to meet with them once a week to get them through the steps. And then, but I am missing out on meetings. Not that I'm not going to meetings, but I'm not going to, 5 meetings a week like I used to. But I'm finding a good balance with a couple meetings a week, my sponsees, and just making sure that I take time to myself, whether that be in recovery and sobriety or whether it be just a day for self-care.
Yeah, I completely relate to it too, because even today, right now, so I'm over 5 years, but I work 50, 55, sometimes 60 hours a week. I ref soccer games on the weekends. I have the podcast stuff. I had my recovery meetings. And then now I'm about to start an anatomy class, and it's Monday and Wednesday for 5 hours both
Woo.
days. Like, you go from one class for an hour, then you go to another class for an hour, then you have 2 hours lab after that. And I'm looking at my schedule and I'm like, I'm at the point where if I add something, something has to be subtracted. Just to fit in everything. So I'm
Mhm.
glad you mentioned kind of the burnout, but I think it's positive because you realize it. Because there was a
Mhm.
long time that I didn't realize when I was burning out, and I should have seen a crash coming long before I did, So, and I think it's very relatable because so many people have experienced that, because our life gets better and our life starts growing and you get more
Yeah.
responsibilities, and balance is something I'm always working on. I don't know if I'll
Mhm.
ever have it mastered, but Robert, how do you keep balance in your life, with your wife, with sponsees, with recovery stuff? How do you keep the balance, do you think, in your life? What's a secret for you?
You know, I take my own inventory. I do step 10 every day. I continue to take a personal inventory, and when I'm wrong, properly admit it, which is very often. My sponsor, Slow Will, happy, grateful, recovered alcoholic, been sober going on 46 years now. He tells me if we clear away the wreckage of our present, it doesn't become the wreckage of our past, which is very profound. Uh, but Whitney brought up something really interesting, and she discovered it, and I discovered it. I went back and got my degree in alcohol and drug studies when I was 39 years old. And so I was 8 years sober at the time. And I thought that if I just worked in treatment, that would be enough for me. And just like any practical approach, if I'm emptying the cup, I need to fill the cup. And one of the things that Whitney has discovered, and by the way, you look fantastic.
Oh,
Uh,
thank you.
you're welcome. And I always thought you were very pretty. One of the things that's so important is, and Whitney touched on it, and maybe she can touch on it more. We empty our cup through serving others, but that empty cup has to be filled. And our own recovery, our own personal recovery, is the only thing that can fill that cup, because newcomers, whether work or in avocation or vocation, they drain us. And so if we take a lake bed and without an inlet, eventually we're going to dry that lake bed. So we need to have a channel that's flowing water in to the same degree that water is flowing out. Whitney, do you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Hmm.
How did you find that true for you? What did you do? I'm sorry, this is your podcast, Drew, and I'm asking the question. But how did you combat that? What was it about your own recovery? And Drew, you can talk about the same thing because you give and you give and you give with your podcast. Um, what did it take for you to discover that? And what did you do to combat it?
I like that question. Like I said, I wasn't going to as many meetings because of all this other stuff I had going on. So I really focused on my own personal recovery, like at home, waking up in recovery every day. And like I said, I get so much from sponsoring other women. And I've got a good handful of them now. So, I mean, I'm seeing or talking to them at least every day of the week, right? That, I don't know what it is, but that serving others and watching them, take these steps, is so rewarding, and it gives me fire for recovery every time. But I believe a lot in like what people do at home and not with everyone watching. I wake up and I call them dailies, start my day off right. And I just like to live in these new principles that I have been taught. This whole program taught me to live in all these different principles, and I feel so much better about my life on a daily basis because of that. I'm not chasing away darkness or running away from it, whatever it is. I'm filling my life and my days with light, and I love my life now. I wake up and I'm not, chasing bags. I'm eager to read my books and to talk to God and all these different things. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. So realizing that your resources were being depleted, you threw yourself into your own personal recovery even more.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Anyway, I'll turn the show back over to you, Drew.
Oh no, you're good. That was a great question, Robert, and I like how you mentioned that. And I'll just touch on this as well too, Whitney. I've been through the same thing where I've kind of felt like I just had a lot going on, and it was the same thing for me. I had to figure out my own stuff, and one of them was kind of what Robert talked about as well. I remember I was working in treatment. I was about 9 months sober. I started working in treatment, but I was also working at a grocery store, and I needed money. I had a bunch of probation stuff to pay off. I was working an insane amount. And it was kind of like Robert talked about as well, where I kind of, my recovery became like the groups that I was doing at the treatment center. And
Mm-hmm.
I started to notice that I was giving a lot at those, but then what both of you talked about, I wasn't really doing too much for my personal stuff. And luckily I figured out, I was able to kind of bounce back from that, make some changes, but I can relate to what both of you guys were saying with that. I'm gonna get to this. I'm gonna get to this first question here. I'll start with you, Robert. Once I get a sponsor, how soon can I start my steps?
You know, that is an often misunderstood question. And I find it misunderstood in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. Before I got to the rooms of AA, I already had to be convinced that I was powerless over alcohol, that my life had become unmanageable. And I didn't know you were going to ask this question, Drew. And I already turned to page 34 of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. It says, for those who are unable to drink moderately, the question is how to stop altogether. We are assuming, of course, that the reader desires to stop. Whether such a person can quit upon a non-spiritual basis depends upon the extent to which he has already lost the power to choose whether he will drink or not. So I have to be convinced already before I get to you, before I get to Whitney, before I get to that sponsor. I have to know that I can't drink, that alcohol, I will soon discover that alcoholism is the problem, but I have to admit to my innermost self that I'm alcoholic. This is the first step in recovery. And if I don't admit that, no sponsor in the world convince me of what he doesn't know. I have to be convinced of what I do know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I'll kind of turn to you for this as well, Whitney. How long do you think it takes before you could start the steps? And then also, how did you know that you were powerless?
Well, I'll start with that second one first. How did I know that I was powerless? I'm one of those prideful people. That's one of my character defects. I have this ego before I came into this program to where I always was justifying a different way, but not, obviously not the right way, but like maybe smoking weed only, like these kinds of things, right? So I come into treatment not on my own will. Thanks to the law, I was in treatment and really defiant, really didn't want to be there. And graduated successfully and went right back out about a month later, right? That's when I knew I was completely powerless. I had this treatment. I had actually put a pretty decent effort into like this AA program. I had started working the steps, but I still failed, right? And I moved back to Salt Lake City, and that was kind of my part of my demise. But that's when I knew I was powerless and had to go back to treatment. The other question was, remind me.
Oh, it's just like how long before you could start the steps?
Okay, yeah. Well, I think that may be different for everyone, but personally, I started right into them. I didn't waste time. And I kind of like to do that with my sponsees as well, get them right into it. Whether they know they're powerless or not, I'm sure that will come, later or not. But I like to get them at least working the steps right off the bat. I don't want to waste time. I don't want to give them time to like go explore, go, lose the fire. So I like to get them right into it, and it seems to work well that way.
And
But I don't.
just as a caveat to what Whitney said, as you and I discussed earlier, Drew, the person who has got 30, at the time he had 33 days sober, 32 days sober, and he's already on step 4.
Right.
And he said, is it too soon? And I was talking to Drew earlier, Whitney, and if you read the 12 and 12 of that Bill wrote back in 1953, if you read the 12 and 12, it talks about the newcomer doing step 4. I think it mentions it 4 times. The newcomer is involved. So I would imagine in a relatively short period of time, the original expectation was as soon as you can start the steps. There's a myth in AA. Oh, I can't do my 4 step until I'm 6 months sober, 9 months sober. Yeah, by that time you're going to go back out. You're going to be back at step 1. So I'd like your approach, and Jason Trimble has the same approach as well. The sooner you get them surrendered, get them in the steps, because the steps reveal so much about me, which has always been the hindrance. You mentioned it earlier, ego and pride. It was always the hindrance of me. We have met the enemy, and it is us. Nietzsche said that when we stare into the abyss, it stares back. So as soon as we can clear that out, the better off everyone is going to be.
Yeah, and I like the idea of, look, we need to get some relief as fast as possible. And I've heard that too, where I've heard of people talking about, oh, I'm doing, as I sometimes hear it out here. I don't know if you guys hear it where you're at, but like I'm the working a step a year almost. It started at like, it started at, first I would hear a month, and then I've like heard it morphed into a year. And I kind of look back on my experience, and had I not started to get relief within the first few months, there's no way I was making it any further. When I came in, I needed help quick, like really quick. And I'm kind of going to circle back, Robert, when you were talking about kind of, you have to find the powerless. You have to believe that, at least coming in and even showing up to get any help, because, and I can relate to that because, man, I had to really believe that, because I hear a lot of stuff today, especially on social media. I hear a lot of like moderation and drinking a little bit less. And I hear a lot about the marijuana stuff. And my thing is, look, if that works for you, that's cool. But I look back on my experience and there's no way, if I could have moderated, I would have done it a long time ago, a long time ago. Like I even got a comment not too long ago. They're like, how about you just don't do drugs or something? I'm like, do you think I haven't thought about that?
You tried that.
Like, do you think that you're coming up with this like kind of novel idea that maybe I should not do drugs, you know?
Oh my gosh.
It's funny. I'll go to this next question. I'll start with you, Whitney. Can I make my amends by writing them a letter?
Well, and this is why you have a sponsor, right? To like answer all these questions for you. In my case, well, and I think in general, I think it's wise to make your amends face to face at any cost if you can, right? There are some situations where maybe it's dangerous for you to see this person face to face, or maybe they're out across the country, or maybe in my case, maybe this is TMI, but I had a child molester in my story, right? And how do you kind of make those amends, right? But if you can do it face to face, I think you're going to get the most out of that. You're going to see them, either respond or not respond to that. And my most rewarding amends came from face to face experiences. But in my case, there's also so many of them that it would be dangerous for me to see them, at least in my early days, right? And so I would write letters, and maybe if I ever ran into them like out of nowhere, I would handle it then too. But I tried to do most of mine face to face, because I think that's, for both people, you get the most reward that way. So
yeah, and I really like how you answered that. Did you have to write any letters for yours, Robert? Was that part of your process?
I did, but I think Whitney had the perfect answer. You do what you can do based on availability, based on safety, based on convenience. It's more important that we do them. And I like how Whitney mentioned sponsorship. Man, my sponsor guided me through so much of that stuff. I just went to my sponsor and said, what do I do? The greatest story that comes to mind, except it says, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. So there were certain things I never told my first wife. It was enough for her to know that I was a terrible husband. It was enough for her to know, she already knew, that I was an adulterer. It was already enough for her to know that I was a liar. I didn't have to go into detail about that to clear away that wreckage. And my sponsor helped guide me through that. So, because that would have injured her unnecessarily. And so again, like Whitney said, you do the best you can do at the time, but run these things through your sponsor, because let him or her guide you because we want to say, I'm sorry, I did this, I did that. And we don't see with the vision of someone who's done it before and who has understood the ramifications of doing too much or not doing enough.
Yeah, and I like that you mentioned that too. And it kind of reminds me, I remember anytime I'd go to rehab and I'd be sitting there in treatment and I'd start to feel better, and I just got detox, and now I'm over at the residential side, and like my first thing I wanted to do was hop on the phone and just fix every single thing that I had that I had ruined. And Thankfully, there was some really good people there that had experience in recovery, and they're like, dude. I remember one of them sitting me down and he goes, man, if you tried to fix everything right now, like you won't, like, it's not going to happen. Even if I were to let you get on that phone, and there's a lot of damage that's already been done and that could be even done even more. And you're not going to be able to fix it all overnight. And it took me a little bit to realize that. But I remember when I was working in treatment as well. And it was like the first thing everyone wants to do is they want to get on that phone, and they want to start calling. Oh, I want to call my baby's mama, and I want to call my parents, and I want to call this person. I'm going to fix all this. I'm going to call my old boss and ask for my job back, and just all types of stuff. And yeah, thankfully I had people around me, and like you guys mentioned, like the sponsor to just kind of guide you and to say, look, and I love how you said it too, Robert, where it's like you need the help a lot of times of someone who's already been through it and can kind of steer you in the right direction. I'll start at
And
you, or go ahead, Robert.
I will add, Drew and Whitney, I will add that a person doesn't have to accept my amends for my amends to be complete.
Right. Mm-hmm.
There's nothing in that step. And Father Martin, Joseph Martin, who's passed away, he had 50 years sobriety when he died. And if you don't listen to Father Martin, my recommendation, my suggestion is that you YouTube this giant of a man.
Yeah.
And Father Martin's, he talks about a guy who went into somebody's office and said, I'm sorry I did this, I'm sorry I did that. And forgive my language here, but the guy said, you were an asshole then, and you're an asshole now. Get out of my office. And the guy understood that it wasn't the amends received, it was the amends given. And so often, why can't you forgive me? Why can't you this? It's not about them. It's about you clearing the table, getting all manners of business right. Now, do I hope they don't think I'm an a-hole? Of course. Is it necessary that they don't think I'm an a-hole? No, it's not. And that's something where, once again, our sponsor can really help us, because sometimes some amends, they don't turn out real good. They still don't invite us over. I have a brother who still doesn't talk to me. That's on him. That has nothing to do with me, because I said I'm sorry, and I've lived a sober life for decades. All I can do is say I'm sorry and be a different person.
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing that, Robert. I'll go to, and I think it's a great point too, because, and that was something that honestly I kind of had wrong. I thought that my amends process is over like when they're good with me or something like that. And I found out very quickly that there's some of those that are never going to happen, like it's just not going to happen. And one person, a lot of people over here actually described it as clearing my side of the street was what I was doing. And, so let me see. I'll go to you for this, Whitney. I really like this question. I'll probably ask both of you guys, but my brothers all drink and they invite me to go golfing, etc. with them. Is it a bad idea for me to go?
In my treatment center, I get this question often, whether it be golfing, whether it be I have a family dinner and half of them will be drinking, right? We get this question so often, and it's hard to really say like, a black and white answer on that. I think a lot of it has to do with where you're at in your recovery, for one, how much these people are supporting you in your journey, for two. But I mean, initially we want to say no, the more time you spend in these situations, the more your wall comes down, or the more that influence will have on you without knowing. And I think that's very true too. So, I mean, someone in early recovery, I would highly recommend that they avoid those situations. But then again, there's things like Christmas where, you see your family once a year. So it's just really hard to really say what is that word? Definitive? I don't know. Definitive yes or no, but I think so many of the I can't talk right now. So many of the factors are what you need to look at, like who these people are. Do you have sober advocates with you? Can you take your sponsor? Can you not? Like, these things all play into it, right? So Robert might have a better answer on this one for that.
No, I think foundationally, Whitney, you hit the nail on the head. Every person has to judge that for themselves. And I will share a great lesson that my sponsor, Jack Fisher, he passed away with 44 years sobriety uh, 5 years ago. I still miss Jack. He was my sponsor for 32 years. And, and I remember when I became employable and I graduated from the graveyard shift serving watered down margaritas for $1 to opening up very expensive bottles of wine at the Golden Nugget. And I would have drank either in my non-recovered days. But I remember being so afraid. And Whitney, this speaks to your point of what are your motives? Because that's what you're talking about. And I remember opening up these bottles of wine for Kenny Rogers was going to be in the showroom. So we were pre-opening wine, and I don't know, my sixth case of wine opening, and we pre-corked them and set them on the table. And all of a sudden, the bouquet of these wines just hit me like a head-on collision. So I got on my bicycle because the state of Nevada said I wasn't able to drive. And so I rode my bike down to the Alano Club where my sponsor was. And for 45 minutes, guys, all I could do was stutter and cry. And I was trying to explain to Jack how opening this wine was really dangerous for me. And so Jack said, he ran me through these litany of questions, and I was almost insulted. Why you're there? Why are you around alcohol? Why? And it came down to, and I finally yelled at him and said, it's my freaking job. And he looked at me and he said, so your motive was to not drink? I said, no, Jack, if I don't go there, I can't pay my rent, can't pay my child support, can't pay my court fines. I'm screwed. And Jack looked at me and said, why don't you go back and do your job? And I got on my bike, my 3-speed, it was pretty fast. And I drove back down to Golden Nugget, rode my bike back down to Golden Nugget. It was about 2 hours later. I told my boss I was feeling better, and he let me go back to work. So I agree with Whitney. It's about motive. Every situation has to be measured. Why are you there? Is it something that's safe for you? Because I believe, like we believe, a slippery slope, you slip on a slippery slope. If you have solid footing, you're probably going to be safe. So whether it requires you taking a sober advocate or making sure your motive is right for being where you're being, then you're on safe ground.
Yeah, and I really like, and this is what this reminds me of, the part in the book where they're kind of talking about this, and then they go into saying like, start to think about what you can bring to the occasion versus what you're going to be missing out on. I think they're talking about kind of like a social setting and stuff, but yeah, I really like how you guys asked that or talked about it, and also this question in general. This is something that. Like you mentioned, Whitney, I hear this a lot because, it seems to be the number one thing when people are really starting to try and stay sober, and they're like, look, can I do this? Can I do that? Is it okay? So I really like that you guys, one, brought this question up and how you answered it as well. I'll ask you this, Robert, and I think we've covered kind of similar things to this, but what should I look for in a sponsor?
In the beginning, I was looking for a guy as crazy as me who wasn't drinking. And so Steve Matthews, who is the retired manager of the Triangle Club in Las Vegas, Nevada, he was 6 months sober, and he became my first temporary sponsor. And because he was nuts like me, but yet he was sober like I wasn't. And so he was relatable. And so when I needed more out of sobriety, I found Max. And then when Max moved, I found Jack. And and there's nothing wrong with outgrowing your sponsor as long as they have what you want and what you want is the right thing. Then I believe you can have your sponsor forever. Jack again was my sponsor for 32 years because Jack, he was like a Buddha baby. He was overweight. He had receding hairline. He wasn't in a marriage. In many ways, he was not like me, but there was something magical about Jack. There was Jack had an easiness of life. He had a way of going through life almost unscathed, and I made everything a big deal. And so I wanted someone who had sober maturity and who didn't make such a big deal about everything. I wanted to know what that magic panacea, what that magic was, how he approached the steps to give him that peace, that quietness, that understanding that I evidently lacked in my life. And then when Jack died in January of 2019, I immediately thought of my next sponsor, who would be Slow Will. And Slow Will taught me from day one. I've known Slow Will for over 39 years. Slow Will taught me how I could believe everything in the first 164 pages because I wanted that foundation. I wanted to go back to the beginning, even though at the time I was, 34 years sober. I wanted to go back to recapture that feeling. Even though I was an old timer, I wanted to go back to see what it was like when I had that fire, that passion as only a newcomer can.
Yeah, and I like that you mentioned too, like the just your sponsor having just kind of going about life a little bit differently, something that you wanted. You wanted the ability to. He seemed to go through life unscathed, and it didn't seem to be too affected by it. And you mentioned everything was a big deal to you, and you saw it. Look, this guy's living a life in a way that I would like to, or at least a quality that I value that I'd like to work towards, something like that. I really like how you put that. I'll ask you, Whitney, how did you find your sponsor? How did you know, hey, look, this is someone that I would trust in going through this process with, or what appealed to you? What about their recovery appealed to you?
Well, that first time around, I just got a sponsor to get a sponsor, right? I mean, she stood out to me in a meeting and, she seemed like somebody I respected, and that's all as far as it got, really. That second time around, I waited, and I wanted to see somebody that was walking the walk. I wanted to see somebody that lived out those 9-step promises, like, confidence. They seem to live a happy, joyful life that, they don't struggle, all these different things that the promises bring you. And this person, my sponsor, I saw walking the walk like that. And she was actually really early in her recovery, but to me, that didn't matter as much as how much she had that fire of recovery about her, and she was ambitious in getting me on the steps and working the steps. And I could just tell that it meant a lot to her. I could tell that sponsoring women wasn't just something she was doing by the wayside. It was something she was passionate about. And aside from that, I just really liked her approach and the way she would answer my questions and maybe step in or let me figure it out myself. But just the right amount of like coaching, I really liked her whole approach that way. So as time went on, I loved my sponsor more and more, and I just think those were the things I personally was looking for in the beginning with a sponsor.
Whitney says something very important in the word coaching. And that's what a sponsor is. And they're a coach because we go to them and when especially if you're an athlete, and we all have been athletes, some more recent than others. But we've all needed someone to coach us how to stand in the batter's box, how to set ourselves up as a midfielder, as a striker, as whatever our sport is. We've needed coaching along the way. And when we get to the rooms of recovery, we don't know what we're doing. We just know we can't drink anymore. We know that for whatever reason, I can't drink. I can't use. And it was interesting early on in my sobriety at the turning point. I think it was at an 8:00 meeting. A guy said, not every time I drank, I got in trouble, but every time I got in trouble, I was drunk. Really interesting concept. Not every time I drank did I get in trouble, but every time I was in trouble, I was drunk. And he needed, I think he even used the same word, Whitney. He needed a coach, a sober coach, someone who can guide him through, because a coach is more than a sponsor. A sponsor creates a level of intimacy, of what you mentioned earlier, that degree of fellowship that we really want. But a coach is X's and O's. This is what you do when this happens. This is how you respond when this happens. This is what you do when you want to drink. This is what you do when you want to go help others. This is what you do when you entertain step 8. Coaching, because they've already done it. They know the steps and they coach us through our current situation because they've been there. So I think that word, Whitney, coaching, is so important.
Yeah, I love the word coaching, and it's interesting too because, and we kind of talked about this a little bit earlier too, Robert. It's just this idea that I'm seeking help, and I don't have to try and do everything on my own, because I know there's so many of us that whether the things that were going on with our drinking or our using was secret, maybe it wasn't, but a lot of us just tried to solve it on our own. And I remember thinking for a long time, look, I've got myself into this mess. I need to find a way out. And like both of you guys mentioned, as I came into recovery, it's like, I have a lot of questions. Like the whole point of why we do this too is so many questions in the beginning, and just having someone to kind of turn to that's kind of done it themselves. It just helps so much just to get some type of guidance, but also kind of just like a companion, someone I could talk to about this stuff. Because I know a lot of times when we get sober, it's like not everyone in our life can we talk to about this stuff. A lot of people would think we're crazy if we said, look, I know all this damage I've done because of drinking or whatever, but my head's telling me to drink right now. It's hard to tell people about that. But having the coach, having the sponsor, having the person that is in the fellowship with you, it just helps so much. I want to go over, I know we're getting towards the end.
Can I add one thing to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Something else that was super important for me in my early recovery is my sponsor would always not force me to go to meetings with her, but she would invite me along, and she would, I'd always say yes, but it was always an option. She would go out of her way to pick me up. And it was always nice to know, like, she'd take me to these meetings and introduce me to everybody, got me involved with this fellowship. She got me right in the middle of this huge herd. And that's where I was able to kind of find my ground and find my community. And it wasn't just, I actually knew these people's names every time we'd go around. Otherwise, I would have just been strangers, right? But it was like so cool that she'd go and introduce me to her whole clan so I could start to get to know everybody. And I thought that was pretty important too. So.
Yeah, that's super important, and it feels good. I feel like it's so much easier to have someone that's kind of bringing you in the middle. It can be intimidating a lot of times when you're showing up to a meeting or some type of recovery function, and you don't really know anyone, and everyone seems to know each other. And it helps so much to have someone who could say, "Hey, look, this is this person, this is this person," and you just feel a little bit more comfortable, And it's nice to not be so on edge when you're meeting new people that you've never maybe met before. I want to go into this. This was a comment I got 4 days ago, and we could just kind of comment on it, see if there's anything we can relate to. He said, "Thanks for the video. I've been watching as many meth videos as I can. Just decided I need to stop now. I've been using it over the past year. I've only been using a little bit, but even that has become too much. I've had little bouts of psychosis. Plus, my boss suspects me of using something. I need about 4 days to just look normal so I can go to work. I get really emotional afterwards. Anything you can
Mhm.
relate to in that, Robert?
You know, the only way for me to quit smoking was to quit smoking. The only way for me to quit doing crystal was to stop hitting the pipe. The only way for me to stop drinking was to stop drinking. Um, so if we're treating our sobriety as a vacation, if we're maybe this person hasn't lost enough, and that's scary. Remember, um, Father Martin said again, so profound. He said this guy goes into the psychologist and he's talking about all the things that hasn't happened to him yet. And the psychologist says, we've already discussed the things that haven't happened to you. Let's talk about the things that have. And even Bill and the others, the early founders of Alcoholics Anonymous, understood that they had to raise the bottom of recovery because not everyone like me is on their third marriage. Not everyone has dropped out of school. Not everyone has lost countless jobs. But what has to happen to you before we make the connection between meth and losing or drinking and not gaining? What has to happen to us for the wheels to click that I can't use anymore? What has to happen to us as individuals to be sick and tired of being sick and tired? What do we have to lose before we admit that we're powerless? Powerless means we have no power. That once I start drinking, once I start using, I'm going to use and drink until there's no more to drink or use. That's just the way the craving works. I didn't set myself up like that. I'm just 10% of the population that can never, after 39 years, 3 months and 20 days, or whatever the crazy number is, I'm just one drink away from a drunk. I'm just one hit away from a high. And once that happens, I'm off to the frickin' races, just like a newcomer. And so complete and total abstinence is the only answer for a person like us and maybe the person who asked this question.
Yeah, and I like the way you put that, and I hear I hear people talking about trying to just drink a little bit less, and like we mentioned before, it's like there's some of us where that's just never going to happen. It's just never going to happen, and for me, it was like the sooner I realized that for myself, that's when I started to kind of move towards change a little bit. I'll ask you, Whitney, just about this comment. They mentioned not using a huge amount, but they're starting to see problems. They've seen a little bit of psychosis. Their boss suspects them of using something. They kind of need 4 days to look normal and get back to work, but they get really emotional afterwards. To me, it kind of sounds like Robert talked about raising the bottom, where things are starting to kind of hit the fan. We're starting to see some problems, little bit of psychosis, a little bit of problems. My boss is starting to suspect something. I get kind of emotional afterwards. Do you remember this kind of phase where problems are starting? It hasn't got totally bad yet, but you're well on your way. Do you remember when you were in this phase?
Oh, very well. And it's like I've been in that phase multiple times too, in all my different stints to try to recover. But one thing I do remember very well is that lack of control over my emotions and everything, and being like just popping off at something that is so minimal, but when I'm high on meth or strung out like that, trying it's just crazy the emotional reaction I can get out of myself, right? But yeah, I remember that very well. And you'll push it and you'll ride it till the wheels fall off. You'll just keep going and going until something physically stops you from going. And that's what it takes for people like us, right? I mean, that's what it took for me. And so unfortunately, it sounds like this guy may have to just fall, pretty hard on his face before he finds that he's powerless and wants to get help. You have to really be hurting to want to reach out and get help.
Let me interject there because Whitney hit the nail on the head once again. It says in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start.
Mm.
And we don't beg you because Whitney, nor Drew, nor me, nor others like us, we don't need this person who asked the question, we don't need them to recover for our recovery to occur. We don't need them. We want them to be. So we beg you, and I'm talking to this person who asked this question, I'm begging you to be fearless and thorough from the very start for your sake, not mine, because we're going to go to sleep tonight and tomorrow we're going to have one more day sober. But I'm begging you because I don't want you to be divorced from your second wife. I don't want you to lose your job. I don't want you to lose the respect of your loved ones. Whitney's got a great relationship with her mom and dad. So do you, Drew. Mine are passed away, but when they passed, we were on good terms. I don't want you to have your dad say, your mother and I aren't going to watch you die. My dad said that to me. I don't want this person to experience it. So that's why we, the three of us, that's why we beg you, not for us, for you.
Yeah. And I'll just kind of piggyback off that too. I hope that this person is able to see that although it's not terrible yet, it's well on its way. It's well on its way. I'll say this. I was in that exact same stage when I started to see small problems, and it got 100 times worse from that point. I'll say that. And believe me, there was a time when meth worked for me. There was a time where it made me go to work. I was like superhuman. My boss said, damn, this dude can work. Like this guy knows how to work. But shortly after that, it started to fall off. And a lot of these signs that I see in this comment, I experienced all of them, every single one of them, and it started to get worse.
Let me just add to that, because that's the thing. When I relapsed after 71 days, that's the thing that astounded me so quickly, because when we start to go down, we go down quick and we go down hard. I was just drunk for 5 days, 5 freaking days. And I sat up in my hotel room in Las Vegas, and it amazed me, not that I was drunk, that I was trying to recapture, how I could lose everything worse than ever before in just 5 days. And we don't know when we're going to hit that mark. Whitney, Drew, we don't know when we're going to hit that. We don't know when the bottom's going to fall out. Remember at the carnival, they have this ride called the tilt-a-wheel, and we go around so fast in centrifugal force, and the bottom drops out. Could you imagine what would happen to us if that wheel stopped spinning abruptly? We would fall to our death. And that's what happens when we relapse. And that's what amazed me, how quickly I got worse than I ever was before. And that's why we beg you.
Yeah. And thank you both of you for commenting on this. I'm gonna finish up with this one. We'll just I'll read a little bit of this comment. We could just do a quick comment each on it, and then we'll go from there. It says, a person I care about has been in withdrawal for 3 weeks, and every time I try and help with his recovery, he just gets really irritated, which I understand is part of the process. But he thinks because he's been clean for 3 weeks, his irritability is justified. I know that you can't help people who are not willing to accept it, but I wonder what supported you. Anything you can relate to in that, Whitney, just the irritability of this person's trying to help someone and their friend's super irritable with them. Were you ever like that? Can you relate to this at all?
Absolutely. I've tried to get sober countless times, and there were the times where I did it without, professional help, meaning, I'd go down to St. George and hide out at my parents' second home to sober up and not have anybody around me, things like that. And it's like, I always was, I just so rude to everybody, so irritable to everybody, so just not pleasant to be around. And I'm sure that's the case with this guy too. But what it took for me, I had to go straight into professional help. I had to get into treatment where people there knew how to handle people in that kind of state. I mean, that irritability will be there regardless, right? So you might as well have professional help while you're doing it. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a tough thing. And have you witnessed that before, Robert, where they're coming off stuff and people are trying to help them and they're just so irritable and you're almost pushing everyone away?
Yeah. Anxiety is such a critical point. And you'll agree with me, Whitney, especially with you, you've seen it in your recovery position, working in recovery. There's nothing worse than a little physical sobriety, because on one hand, we know we don't have to use anymore. But on the other hand, anytime something would happen, we would use. And I was talking to a guy yesterday. This one young man who's 64 days sober today. I said, when was the last time you were 63 days sober? And he said when he was 13. And he's 36 years old now. So for 26 years, the most he has ever gone without putting an end to how he feels, satisfying that anxiety with a drug or a drink, was 63 days in 26 years. We have to find something. And Drew, you mentioned it earlier. Sometimes it's just a fellowship. Sometimes it's just walking the room and being around a group of people that know why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling, and having them hug me and hold me and tell me everything's going to be okay, providing I don't drink or I don't use. And conversely, on the other hand, there's a program called Al-Anon that this loved one needs to go to, because you can't do anything to expedite this person's wellness, but you can do something to keep you from going crazy. And a support group with people who understand what you're going through is as helpful to you as it is to this person. Because once you realize you can't fix them, it's going to be better for you. And it's actually going to be better for them, because you're not going to bail them out. Sometimes helping a person means you let go so they can hit their bottom quicker, because a person never rises until they hit their bottom. Just like a yo-yo. You ever see a yo-yo? The only time a yo-yo bounces back up when it gets to the end of its string. And there's an important poem that I learned years ago. As children bring their broken toys with tears for us to mend, I brought my broken dreams to God because He was my friend. After waiting patiently, I screamed, "How could you be so slow? My child," He said, "what could I do? You never did let go." And until we hit the bottom, we never come back up. Until we hold on to that drink or that drug as a means of getting over our anxiety, we'll never get through our anxiety.
Yeah, I love that. Hey, I just want to say thank you guys. It's been an hour. Time goes by fast when I'm talking to you guys. We cover so much stuff. I just want to say I appreciate you guys. I always love you guys coming on. I appreciate all the insight, answering all the questions, bringing all these questions from all these people that are new and just getting sober. And I appreciate all the comments as well. Anyone who's watched this Ask It Basket series that we've been doing, anyone that sent questions in, stuff that we've commented on and stuff. It's all good stuff. So thank you, Robert. Thank you, Whitney. Appreciate you guys.
Thank you.